All right. And I thought some of you might be myopic, so that's why we've got the big text. Take a seat. So we've been forward, we've looked forward, we've talked about all sorts of things, but now we're going to go back 200 years to Vienna, home of Franz Schubert, the composer of symphonies, string quartets, operas, and my area of special interest, Lieder, or German art song. I'm going to provide a brief background into my research of Winterreise, and then finish with some singing for you. And I'm not going to be doing some singing, someone else is. I've been fascinated by Schubert's epic song cycle, Winterreise, since I first sang the very first song as a 19-year-old. And what's interested me most in recent years is not the musical language, interpretation or technical skills required of the work, and I've got to tell you, they are significant undertakings for any singer, but the extra elements of musical performance not related directly to the music, but rather to venue, accompanying instruments, and the visual aspects of performance. My question, to stage or not to stage, is not a question about Schubert's intentions, but rather to examine our current perceptions of musical performance of Lieder and Winterreise in particular, while considering historically informed research. Some of you won't be familiar with this general topic, so let me provide a very brief background of Schubert, Vienna at the time, and the development of Lieder, the German word for songs. And in case you're wondering what's this all about, some years ago I was on an arts panel. We were giving funding for various projects, and there was some contemporary popular musicians sitting in the room, and they didn't understand a particular application. And one of the wags in the room said, "Dead, white, European male music." That's what we're talking about. Okay. So Franz Schubert is born in Vienna in 1797, 6 years after Mozart's death. As the son of a teacher, he's well educated and he gains a place in a prestigious school of the court, but he's neither politically nor socially important like his contemporary Ludwig van Beethoven, nor the virtuoso performer like Mozart. The world in which he grows up has experienced significant unrest, with Napoleon invading in 1805, I've got to get this century right, 1805 and again in 1809. The Congress of Vienna, as it was called in 1815, leads to long-term peace and stable government in Vienna, but there's an active suppression of liberal thought and any development of nationalism. Underpinned by the government's spy network, the imposition of censorship means that concert programs requires the prior approval of the censors. It's not surprising, therefore, that a significant portion of music making is concentrated in salons, homes, or smaller public meeting places such as cafes or taverns. Schubert grows up with rapid advances in technology, particularly the major technical improvements in musical instruments. The most common instrument is the forte piano, a delicate keyboard instrument. But in these first few decades of the 1800s, a new instrument is developed, the pianoforte. It's bigger than its predecessor, it has more notes, it's louder, it has greater tonal variety options, and it has more sustaining power. This new invention gives rise to new techniques of compositions and performances, but it's expensive, so few musicians have access until the 1840s. And there's no evidence that Schubert ever owned a keyboard instrument or that he ever specifically wrote for the pianoforte. However, most of his compositions and writings from the period use the terms clavier, forte piano and pianoforte interchangeably, so there's some dispute about Schubert's intentions for his various compositions. Schubert's supporters comprised... We've lost one again. Here we go. Schubert's supporters comprised poets, artists, musicians, philosophers, and music lovers from the middle class and minor nobility. These friends arranged for some of Schubert's instrumental works to be performed by the music societies of the day, but only a handful of songs were ever performed publicly, which raises some key questions in my research. Where were Schubert's songs intended to be sung? By whom? Were they amateurs or professionals? And with which keyboard instrument? Prior to Schubert, German song repertoire had predominantly been of a folk song nature with simple strophic texts and simple melodies and chordal accompaniments. Schubert starts writing songs in his teens and becomes a household name with The Earl King, written when he was aged 18, and in this picture he's actually 26, and published 6 years later in 1821 as his opus number 1. It's no ordinary folk song with strophic form or simple emotions, but rather a complex and virtuosic piece with a fiercely independent keyboard part, which was quite shocking for its day, and even today is almost unplayable by most pianists playing on a modern piano. Of Schubert's total output of, wait for it, more than 660 songs, The Erl King is one of only a handful of songs performed outside of the salon in his lifetime. In broad terms, we can say that while Schubert is not the father of Lied or Lieder as a style or art form, he is certainly one that brings it to prominence and makes major advances so that, as Herbert Glass notes, the keyboard part, quote, becomes the interpreter of the singer's words and the singer's equal in both emotional and musical importance, a direction German songwriting took from that time forward. This, of course, is not sadly recognised until after Schubert's death and well into the 1830s. Which brings us to Winterreise, literally Winter's Journey, 24 songs composed from a collection of 27 poems by Wilhelm Müller. It's among Schubert's last compositions, and he was indeed correcting the publisher's proofs upon his deathbed in 1828. Winterreise is a really cheery tale. It tells various stories from the perspective of the wanderer. Love found, I've got to tell you that's very brief. Love rejected, and the solitary journey towards madness and death, all told within the context of a bleak winter's landscape. In contrast to the more sanitised and politically correct poetry of the period, Müller's poetic style has a darkness and a brooding that can be considered truly romantic in style and spirit. In musical style, there's a strong reference to the wretchedness of the Erl King from 20 years earlier, with often violent accompaniments and intense word painting, both for voice and for keyboard. This is new. And I say keyboard because there's no evidence to suggest which instrument Schubert actually wrote this for. It goes for 24 songs, the duration is 72 minutes, and it's a marathon for not just the performers but also the audience. In the letter after Schubert's death, Joseph von Spaun recounts Schubert saying, "Come to Schober's today, I will play you a cycle of terrifying songs. They have affected me more than ever has been the case with any other songs." And this was the first performance, sung and played by Schubert himself. Spaun continues, "He then, with a voice full of feeling, sang the entire Winterreise for us. We were altogether dumbfounded by the sombre mood of these songs." And Schober said that only one song had pleased him. Thereupon Schubert leapt up and replied, "These songs please me more than all the rest, and in time they will please you as well." Come to Schober's today begs a question about the venue and the context of Schubert's songs. As I've said, Lieder was predominantly sung in private for friends and acquaintances. Admission was not charged, and frequently music performance was incorporated within the broader setting of discussion of literature, visual arts, aesthetics, and perhaps politics. Remind you of tonight. Those invited to attend and perform were frequently the so-called cultivated amateur class, being chosen for their social status and cultural appreciation rather than their technical ability as professional musicians. In this 1827 sketch by Ferdinand Waldmüller of Schubert and his friends, we see an event called a Schubertiade. Schubert's music was always featured, and he was frequently the centre of attention, performing as pianist, as a singer and pianist, but more often as accompanist to the singers. In this 1865 sepia drawing by Moritz von Schwind, entitled An Evening at Baron von Spaun, we see a similar scene, although perhaps of a somewhat sanitised Vienna, one that ignores the censorship, political repression or financial strain of the attendees. These drawings have caused me to ponder the elements of venue and performance style with a view to developing a taxonomy of the singing of Lieder. That is, a categorised list of the various elements involved in performance practice for singers in concert or recital. We're very well served by research into performance practice of musical and voice issues, but surprisingly, the non-musical and the non-voice aspects of how a singer should visually present are not well researched. For example, today's typical concert singer stands in front of a grand piano with the lid wide open, and yet we see in these contemporary drawings that the singers are either standing behind the keyboard with the forte piano lid closed, which will of course allow the singer to sing softer and with more intimacy than we are used to in modern recitals with much louder instruments and in much larger venues. This would be deemed to be a massive venue at the time. Of course, these drawings, and there are only 4 that I can find so far, may just be artists' impressions as opposed to outright fact, but they do lead to questions about why we perform Lieder the way we do in the 21st century. I conclude that Schubert did not intend Winterreise to be staged as a quasi-one-singer opera, But when considering that the composition is so evocative and at times declamatory, that the piano writing is so different from all that came before it, and that Schubert's closest friend, mentor and advocate was the recently retired and prominent opera singer Johann Vogel, who is noted for singing with declamatory style, the evidence from a purely historically informed perspective suggests that the work was conceived to be sung in declamatory style with a light forte piano while maintaining an intimacy consistent with the salon in which it was first performed. That doesn't mean that the work should not be performed with the modern piano, or indeed orchestrated or staged. These are valid interpretations or adaptations, just as we sometimes hear Handel music sung with massed choirs, which was never done in his day, or Bach played on piano. But I see no evidence that Schubert intended these variations in his conception of the work. The natural extension of my research is, of course, performance, and I'll be directing and performing in a Schubertiade at the School of Music in late July. During 2017, my intention is to attempt a recreation of the first 12 songs of Winterreise in salon style and with a forte piano. And that will be followed up with a further performance in a staged version of all 24 songs, but incorporating modern media and technology. To conclude, it seems befitting that a talk on Schubert Lieder should involve some singing. We have no piano. We have no forte piano. But we have an intimate, well, semi-intimate gathering of friends and inquiring minds. So I've asked some of our students from the School of Music to present a rarely performed male part song for you. Thank you for your attention, and the guys are already in position. So this is a setting of Lied der Mignon, or Marguerite's song, from Goethe's Faust. It's an unusual format. It's actually for 5 singers, and we're doubling one of the parts. This is most likely for his closest friends to perform at an evening similar to this, and most likely it was written at short notice, having no rehearsal. True community music making for friends within a salon. So this is Nur wer die Sehnsucht kennt, weiß was ich leide, which literally means only those who know what I suffer. Only those who know longing can know what I suffer. Alone and separated from all joy, I behold the firmament from the other side. Ah, the one who loves and knows me is in the vast unknown. It dizzies me, it burns my guts. Only those who know longing know what I suffer.
Ich will